This video is going to demonstrate server-side validation. We will be using Visual Studio 2022, the C# programming language, and we're going to use the code we did in the client-side app since that logic has already been developed. With Visual Studio 2022 open, create a new project. So I've chosen create a new project, and I'm going to choose ASP.NET empty website. And I will call this server-side validation. Here we are at our empty website called server-side validation. I'm going to start adding those other files. So I'm going to right-click on the solution and click on Add New Item. And we'll take a JavaScript file. And I simply want to go over to that JFiddle and copy and paste the JavaScript code over to it. We won't have to rewrite that, and I'm going to rename this so it's the same file name. Main.js is what we called it. Do that again for our CSS. And I'll rename it style, and we'll also be adding a web form. Now, I want you to come down here and take the check out of here because I want to place the code within the same file as the HTML. So let's call this index.aspx. You will notice that when a program becomes server-side, the extension changes from HTML to the type of server-side coding that you're going to do. For example, if you were writing a PHP program, the extension would be PHP. Here for active server pages, our extension is ASPX. So I have this unchecked. I've renamed it index.aspx, and I click Add. Now I want you to notice that at the top, even before the doc type, we now have what's called a directive that lets the server know this page is to be processed using the C# programming language. Okay, so I have not copied my style.css over from that JFiddle. I will do that now. And I decided I had remarked that one out a long time ago, so let's save this. I think I'll rename my form. I'm going to rename it the validate form. Let's rename it input form. And on my previous HTML, I had called the JavaScript function to validate. I still want to do that. I'm going to come over here and copy that over. And that was inside the form ID. And then everything inside a form, I'm going to copy. Form's already there, but these other objects aren't there. A few things I do want to do is notice the green squiggly line here. So for HTML5 validation, I will just put the closing bracket since it's a closed element. I'm going to drag and drop an ASP.NET label that will contain my server-side error. And this label is going to have the text, and I just set the text property right here. I do want you to notice it's going to be run at the server. I want the text to be, say, there was a problem with submission. Please resubmit. Now, the client-side validation gave them the feedback if they had entered anything wrong. So if there was a problem, it would have been something's wrong with the server, or it didn't validate at the server because it had been modified during transmission to the server. So this label, I'm going to give it an ID of error label. So I have it selected here, and over properties, this is going to be my error label. And I'm going to set the visibility to false. So when it first shows, when this web page first shows, this will not be visible. So let's save this and test this with what we have. We haven't written any server-side coding. Let's just make sure that the client side is working. Now, before I do that, however, I do have to link up my main page. I'm going to come over here and drag and drop my reference to my script here and my reference to my style sheet right below it. That should be nested in the head element. Let me nest this in the head element here. Got that formatted. Let's go ahead and test this. Try it again. Click submit. I get the HTML5 error. Getting the HTML5 error. I'm getting the JavaScript error. So that's good. Okay, now we want to add our server-side code. So to add our server-side code, we've got this before the HTML element after the doctype script run at server. We're going to modify this button to an ASP.NET button. I'm going to call it the submit button, and I'm going to make the text say submit. Now you can actually go over to design view and take a look. You can go to split view too. Fingers got. Right, let's see if there's an error here. Okay, and you can double click on that just like you would in a Windows, and it's going to create the event handler for you. So we have the void, it's not going to return anything, and it's responding to the click event. I'm going to create a Boolean variable called good. Assign true to it. So I'm assuming that it's good. Then I'm going to create some variables to contain what has been returned from the post. So when they click submit, what happens is the server is going to gather up that piece of data and that piece of data and return it. And we grab that on the server side through the request object. Inside of square braces, we're going to add the name given to that object. So we're going to come down to our input for the name, and I'm going to assign a name property to it instead of the ID. I don't like that, but that's the way it is. So the name property is what it's going to use, name text box I'll call it. And so up here in quotes, I'm going to assign name text box. Got the syntax wrong. I got to write equals. And we're going to do it again for gender. I'm going to go to the request object, okay, and grab the name property. Well, I don't have a name property. I have an ID property. See, we need the IDs for the JavaScript, get element by ID. Then we need the name here for this server-side coding. So I'm going to grab that name and place it inside of here. We'll go to all source code so we can see it. So what's going to make this not validate? Well, we've got some validation on length. So we can now do an if statement and look at the name. Now the name is a string object in C# like it is in other programming languages, and it has a property called length. So if there's nothing in name, the length will be equal to 0. And if you recall, we didn't want name to go over 40. So if someone came in and modified the name with some long string that has SQL in it, that's over 40 characters, we don't want to process it. So we're going to use the OR character, oh, I got that wrong. If it's equal to 0, or if the length is greater than 40. So if either of those are true, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to say good equals false. So I'm using this as a flag variable to know, we got something wrong. Secondly, I need to check the gender. And if it's not equal to male, unlike Java, you can use double quotes here. And gender is not equal to female. If either of those are true, then what? Then good equals false. So once again, this will stop further processing. Okay, so when I get down here, I'm all done validating. It's either good or not. So I'm going to check the value of good. Hey, if this is good, I think I will redirect it. So I'm going to come over here and add a new web form. I'll call it page 2. And I'll just say form submitted. So if it's all good, we're going to go to the next web page. If it's not all good, we got the else, then what we're going to do is we're going to have to take that error label and set divisible equal to true. And that wraps up what we want to do. So to summarize, we're validating when that button's clicked by using a flag variable. This is known as a flag variable. And we're getting our data using the request object and the name property of the text boxes or of the input elements. It does not have to be text boxes. We're checking against the length of the name, assigning false if it's not valid to our Boolean, our flag variable. We're checking the gender, assigning false. If it's good, hey, let's go on to the next page. If it's not good, we show the error. Before testing the server-side code, there's a few things I want to do. I do need to come in here and assign the style property. Let's see, I want visibility to be hidden. Make sure that error does not show in JavaScript. Now, I'm in split view. I don't like how that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and place maybe a break right here and just type a break. Right there. What's that look like? A little bit better. Maybe I'll try the width at 100%. So I've added another break, and then I made the width be 100%. And I think I want the color red. Now I could style it right here. I could add color red, but you notice over here in properties, you can also set the properties. Red, this is RGB, so red would be FF. Okay, and so maybe this is more what I wanted. I had earlier set the width of the whole form element to be pretty narrow, so that's why that looks like that. One other thing I need to do is I'm not going to be able to test the server-side coding if the JavaScript coding is working. So I'm going to remark out the JavaScript code using the HTML comments because you're adding the JavaScript in HTML. So this is the HTML comments. Up here earlier, I had used C# comments when I was inside the script for the C#. Let's go ahead and test this. Okay, so the HTML5 validation still works. It doesn't need JavaScript to do that. But now it's been submitted. I had a V in there and that didn't validate, so I am getting that error message. So I can redo this with correct data, and it has now taken me to that second web page, which is what we needed. So I hope you enjoy working on this server-side coding lab.